Thanks everyone for joining. It's a pleasure being here today. My name is Yao. Brent, you pronounced it perfectly well. And I'm the managing director and co-founder of Rural Census. And what Rural Census comes to solve is the evidence gap that exists today in the humanitarian and international development sector. And what happens today is that most of the decisions are either being taken based on what I called cold quantitative data, so numbers of people, numbers of toilets, numbers of houses, or based on anecdotal data of a story of some person or some family that tells a story. And at Rural Census, we basically want to combine these two things that both are necessary and make sure that the evidence and the base of evidence is based on numbers and robust data, but that also includes stories about what people care about, what they feel, what are their priorities. And we do this together with local data collectors and basically giving the ownership of collecting and analyzing data to local community members and applying the power of natural language processing of NLP to standardize, streamline, and make this whole process of analyzing data more efficient. And together with me today is Costanza, our head of AI. Costanza is also finishing now her PhD from the University of Cambridge. And we are a team of 9 people today working from multiple places in the world. We are active today in 4 countries in East Africa and East Asia. And it's a pleasure being here today.
Constanza, yeah, I love what you guys are doing, and tell us about yourself and your PhD. I'm doing a master's right now, so I'm really impressed with anybody that's struggling with their studies too.
Struggling is maybe the right word, but yeah. So I am Costanza Stante. I'm currently my last year of PhD at the University of Cambridge. It has been a 4 years journey, but I took some breaks in between for internships and a bit around. But yeah, so I did my master's in NLP with a focus on in NLP and computer science with a focus on deep learning methods, and yeah, my PhD is exactly on that. So at the intersection between deep learning and natural language processing, and what we especially work on is our semantics related tasks. So where you basically try to implement a system that is able to automatically infer semantics, so meanings from text. And I particularly work with a task which is related to sentiment analysis. It's called stance detection. And what we basically do with Rural Census is another semantics related task. So what we try to do is we try to automatically infer which values are elicited in a particular text. And the idea is that we go into the field and then we collect interviews where the people talk about what is important to them. And indirectly, these texts will express a number of what we call user perceived values. And this is a term which comes from value theory, which is used in marketing, also for the developed world. And what we try to do is we try to automatically or semi-automatically actually extract them from text. And in this way, we are able to, using neural networks, we try to automatically extract structured knowledge in the form of UPVs, so user perceived values, from the text. And we can discuss maybe more about these later.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. What sort of, how did Rural Census get started, and what sort of data are you focusing on collecting, and how do you hope to use that data? You know, for what ends? Is it more like needs-based, community needs, or situational information, and etc.?
Yeah, you're muted.
the most common phrase in online meetings. Rural census started in a research that was done at the University of Cambridge. Basically, my co-founder, Dr. Stephanie Hirmer, she did long-term research about how do we capture the values from local communities, from locations where people might be illiterate, not connected to the internet, social media, all that. How do we extract values of these communities and to target better projects to them, and also to allow the people to tell their story in a way that is evidence and data driven. And I joined Steffi's research as a master's student 3 years ago. And as part of my thesis, I went to Uganda to explore how can we use this method to collect data in a scalable way. So it's not to do it in a project by case-by-case basis, but actually how do we leverage what elements do we need to leverage to do it in a scalable way? And the two elements we added to Steffi's research is one, empowering local community members as the data collectors. So instead of sending a researcher from Europe or from the United States to places to low resource settings, we actually make the local communities as an owner of this whole process, and that's why we reduce travel and we facilitate this the whole process. And another element we added was really the NLP. So this analysis of data is already done today by a lot of humanitarian organizations, and it's done manually. So we have people reading through text, through really long texts, and it's very inefficient. Because until the time you get to any kind of conclusion, maybe the need is no longer there, or maybe the project is gone, the funding is moved to something else. And with the use of NLP and standardized analysis, we managed to make this whole process faster, more accurate, and eventually more actionable when we talk about changing needs of communities.
That's really cool. One of our members in Washington, Seattle, Washington, Mark Carr, he's actually working on a cool project where it involves taking radio information, like he plugs into live radio streams, and it'll actually record all the audio, and then to try to process that and sort of categorize what's being said, and try to extract, again, like needs information and situational information, and try to see what can be done with that. But he said it's super, super complicated to just, you just have this raw sound and to actually turn it into text and to be able to process it. So it sounds like, the information that you're collecting is obviously difficult to work with. What, can you give us an example of, a type of information or one of your local partners? I was in Uganda 2 years ago, and it's such a cool place, and everybody's on their mobile phone, and it seems easy to, talk to people, via a mobile phone medium or just on the street and in local NGOs and things like that. But give us an example of a data stream and who collects it and how.
Absolutely. So one of the projects we are working on at the moment is a really interesting, we are helping a really interesting organization that in Nepal. The name of the organization is Days for Girls, and they specifically help to empower young women and girls through women's well-being, women's health, and specifically around menstruation and safety. So I don't know if many of the people here know, but there is a practice common in some parts of the world that when a woman is menstruating, she's staying away from the rest of the family in a shed or a dedicated hut outside the house. And in that time of the month, because she has to stay in this place, she doesn't go to school and she doesn't work, and basically it's a big issue. that prevents women to access education and has a lot of safety issues because some people take advantage of the fact that women are in this space alone at that time. And this organization is really trying to do a lot of work to change that, change this practice, and also give women more tools to take ownership on what they do with their time and where they go whenever they want. And we are doing a research with them, or it's not really research, it's more a dedicated data collection and analysis to understand what are the motivators for this practice to persist. What kind of motives can we find that make people change their behavior? What are the specific challenges that women experience while they're menstruating or around that field of around that area? And yeah, the data analysis is still in process. We just finished the baseline analysis to understand what's the current situation, and I can share a few insights later. But I think what's worth mentioning is that people from the communities that are in the mountainous regions of Nepal were actually going to collect data from people that have no access to phone. So it's not some people, there are not people you can call them or you can text them on social media. They were going mountain to mountain to collect this data and really building this data set from scratch. And now that we have it and we have our model trained on it, it's much easier to come and apply the same models on other communities that might be similar. And obviously we can compare it to other data sets we have from other locations.
You mentioned standards, and it sounds like, when you collect data, the humanitarian field, there's a whole sort of body of knowledge around what sorts of data to collect and information fields and efforts to standardize information fields. And it sounds like you're probably doing that on your end too, thinking about what you collect and try to, again, standardize the questions so that you can collect data and compare it. And how's that going? And how do you feel about standardization? Obviously, in the AI age, to be able to process information, it helps to have it tagged, and standardization initiatives are obviously really important.
Absolutely, and we are big fans of open data and standards. And I think there are a few really interesting initiatives happening at the moment around standardizing data for humanitarian. So you have UN OCHA that's developing the humanitarian data exchange that is really useful, I think, and is quite of a good benchmark. Yeah, so in that sense, we are also collaborating in a group that's called Catalyst 2030. That's a group of social entrepreneurs that work with vulnerable communities in developing countries, with the whole purpose of understanding, guys, we don't need to work separately and we don't need to invent the wheel. Let's work together, let's build standards. And we are actually now started the work on building a standard for data, also from that point of view of working together and understanding that we all need to have the same standards for to make best use of the data that we all collect.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that in humanitarian data exchange. For anybody that doesn't know, UN, they have an initiative where they're trying to get humanitarian groups to, again, to centralize, storage of data, and there's a lot of data sets in it, and to make it more accessible to machine applications. And there's a lot of work going on. There's an initiative called Humanitarian Exchange Language, HXL, to try to tag spreadsheets and information that's coming into the humanitarian data exchange. So it's really cool. So the purpose of this discussion today is to kind of prep our interview, and we love to ask, what would you guys love to share via podcast, and what's super cool that you're working on and that you'd love to get across? And one thing that we spoke on the phone, a week and a half ago, and Constanza, you mentioned something about, dealing with illiterate, data, information, audio information coming from illiterate people. And obviously that, it just kind of blew me away. And I've actually mentioned it like 20 times to different people, but it's just something that from a AI developer perspective to actually how to tackle that. And, it's such a cool challenge. And, what's super exciting to you guys like that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so no, for me, it has been incredible. So it has been an incredible opportunity to get to know, well, Yao and I, we met at Cambridge. So he was a student of engineering for sustainable development, and it is really one of those situations where you see how you can get richer by kind of like exchanging kind of like views with people from other disciplines. But yes, as you said, I studied NLP for really many years now, and I always work with, and I never even thought that I always work with data coming from literate people. You don't think about that, but all the time you work with data coming from social media, people writing stuff or responding to our written stimulus, and this is something that it's just so normal that you don't think about it. And for me, it has been incredibly challenging, also in the sense of how you so first of all, how you collect the data, and then how you pre-process the data, and which specific and like technical challenges you have to overcome in order to really be able to work with these kind of data. So this is something that has been first of all, incredibly challenging, and I learned so much in the process also of also from a human perspective, right? Things that I never thought about. So this has been very, very cool. And also, I think also something which for me has been particularly interesting is this idea was also mentioned before, right? So this idea of kind of like listening to what the people say. So what the people that will be kind of like the end beneficiaries of a project say. And in this sense, for me, it was very interesting to think about the difference of how a simple item that we all use, like a toilet, kind of like which kind of like values or which emotions and feelings it gives to me. That for me is kind of like something super normal. I would never think about that in any specific way, but the way people kind of like in a rural village in Uganda might see the same object and it's completely different. And this piece of information that you do not know what is relevant in a toilet for a woman in Uganda. And we have kind of like pieces of interviews that we can really go and read. And those are powerful stories that are so important to really being able to understand and to view the world as those people see the world, and then being able to go to them and to talk the same language. And it seems like super simple, but it really is not. And for me, it has been super exciting. I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Yeah.
No,
go ahead. And what's cool about, what would you love to get across, about what you guys are doing too?
So like just to go back to that illiteracy issue, if we think just in sub-Saharan Africa, a third of the people are illiterate. So when we take all these data sets, and most of them, the existing data sets come from literate people. So we are basically missing today a third of the people and what they care about and their opinions and their needs. And this is why it's so important that in any data collection, any data analysis that we do for humanitarian purposes, we have ability to mitigate that and to include the voices of also illiterate people. Now, one thing I want us maybe to discuss a little bit, and by the way, I also invite the people here on the call to ask questions or to raise themes that are interesting for you. But I think related to that topic of illiterate, I think there is a lot of bias today in the data, and I think that's also something when we talk about standards, when they say, like in any data set, garbage in, garbage out. So maybe how can we make sure that the data that we are currently using is useful and is valuable data and not biased, and maybe highlight a little bit of what are the existing biases that we might find when we work with qualitative data for humanitarian. So I don't know if it's an interesting topic to cover.
Yeah, I always wonder, there's AI ethics is so popular right now, and I find a lot of people who don't know anything about AI from an engineering standpoint love talking about AI ethics. Because it's, thinking about the back end and building AI applications, there's so much more involved in terms of actually just coding an application and figuring out how to make it work. And then on a higher level, maybe you can start to think about ethics. And how do you implement an ethical guidelines if you don't build a product first and try it out and figure it out? It's sort of like the chicken and the egg problem. But how do you feel about this, ethics, the whole ethics subject, and how do you look at it from an engineering perspective from what you're doing?
Oh, there are, well, that's, I could talk really for hours about that, but yeah, so it's complicated. So there are many elements here. One of them is for sure the bias. So for sure we know that if we just, for example, take systems which have been trained on data of coming from very different demography, we know that we are going to inject some source of kind of like bias into the decisions that the model is going to take, and that's a risk, especially given that we are working with kind of like vulnerable communities. Then there is the part of the data. So once we collect the data, what we did for at least the one data set that we already made public was to manually go through all single sentences and anonymize all mentions of, tribes, people, locations, and remember that we are talking about very small rural villages where very few people live. So even small mentions might maybe be sufficient to go back to the identity of the single person talking. So anonymizing these kind of data sets is very challenging. And then there is the part about kind of like, how to release metadata information about the people talking in a specific interview, and how to possibly integrate this information into the model itself. We clearly know that the more information the model is exposed to, the better it is going to be in kind of like, finding the best parameters. But clearly this might be potentially problematic, and how can we actually expose the model to those elements in a privacy respectful way. So we started experimenting a bit with adversarial training and to expose the model to a couple of variables, and we saw that our classification performance increased, but this is clearly very challenging. And that's definitely ongoing work, but super exciting actually. And so actually ethics in NLP is everywhere. So in all the parts of the baseline. So we have ethical challenges when you collect the data, ethical challenges when you annotate the data, when you decide how to share the data, when you pre-process the data, when you train a model, and when you share and you actually use the predictions of the model in a real case application. So ethics is basically in all parts of the pipeline, I would say. Yeah.
In our interviews, we always ask what you need. We like members to just share what they're working on and what their needs are, and if they have any takeaways. But thinking about what you were just saying, it seems like we need more people working on these challenges. It's super cool what you're doing, and it would be great if we could exponentiate the numbers of engineers and individuals just helping to tackle the foundation level, back end level challenges involved in just getting started doing this. But where do you see needs to help advance this field? Like what can we all be doing? Or, obviously we need more people working on these things, and where and how, and any thoughts on that?
Well, maybe I can start, and then Yao, you can jump in. But at least from my kind of like perspective of also researcher working kind of like on applied research, I think that what for me is very needed is interdisciplinary research, because it is clear that I can take some data and apply some deep learning on it and get good results, but if this is respectful of yeah, or whatever might be the legal consequences on the communities the data is taken from, or how the data might be used, or exactly which people are behind the data, and whether the data are biased or not. All of this comes from discussion with people who worked in development. So I think that it takes also a doses of kind of like also, how to say, humility from AI research to say we know the technical side, but there is much more, and in this sense, kind of like interdisciplinary research is very important. And this is also what happened actually in NLP, if you think about that. So all these research in ethics and NLP started by the collaboration of kind of like philosophers and AI researchers. And I think that, here is very important to continue in this direction. I don't know, Yao, you maybe wanted to say something more.
One thing I want to mention is that Costanza recently wrote a paper about ethics in NLP for international development. So it's worth maybe putting a link somewhere if people want to read it or go through. Another element I wanted to raise is the human in the loop. I don't know, sometimes when people talk about AI, we love, like, AI entrepreneurs and developers, we love to look at AI as like a black box or something that is very automated. And we tend to forget that until you get to this moment of full automation, there is a lot of manual input and human input that's going into the algorithms. And in this specific field of humanitarian, this human factor, we might want it there forever. We might want humans there forever. And there is one thing we've been asked a lot is, how does your algorithms know, like, the specific context, of this specific village in this specific country, in this specific culture? How can the algorithm ever learn that? And the answer is that it doesn't. We have human intervention specifically to make sure we are not missing cultural references and cultural issues. And we see that as a big advantage because it allows us to bring more people from the local context involved in this world of data analysis and AI. And one project, for example, we're looking at in Tanzania, it's not specifically for humanitarian, it's more for development, but it's still it's still a similar process. And in this project, the youth of the city will be involved in collecting the data and will be an active part of interpreting it and basically training the model to get better results. And in that way, we make sure that the results are better, evidence is better, decisions are more accurate and more close to the field. And we are working with local people, giving employment, empowering people to take ownership on what they do, and eventually making sure that people not only own the data, but also own the analysis and own any implication that the evidence will bring. So that's a really important issue for us.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like a lot of work. It's massive. And how would you like to, what do you guys need for help? Like what, obviously, we all need more money and more people and time, and what are your priorities, and what would you, what's your call, your request of the, I don't know, humanitarian tech communities?
So I would say, first of all, data sets. If you work and you have a good data set and it is unbiased and you can vouch for it in some way, get in touch with us and we can maybe apply our algorithms on it, train, see what we can find. That will be really helpful for us. Another thing is, if you're working in a humanitarian organization and you have questions that you want better data to answer, specifically questions that qualitative data can answer, get in touch with us, because we might be able to give you these answers, and if not, it will help us adjust the algorithms to give better answers in the future for organizations like you. Another thing is any researcher or developer that wants to join and explore some of the other types of analysis that we are looking at now. For example, Costanza mentioned recognition, stance recognition, sentiment recognition, emotion recognition. All these things are on our pipeline, and we'd love to have people coming in and joining. And the last thing, just because I know some people on this call are from this field, is about policy. Okay, we have data, we have the evidence. How can we engage policymakers to make better decisions based on that? So if you're in that field, we can collaborate on some of the data we already have and see how we can best use it for policy.
That's really good. I love, we do a lot of work, interviewing people for the podcast, and I end up listening to the clips like 20 times while I edit them. And it's just amazing what everybody's doing. And I guess I'm blown away. And I think it's cool for all of us, the humanitarian actors and tech people, just to know who's working on what and the scope of it. And it's really inspiring. And do you have any special messages, like for humanitarian AI members, students and others getting involved in this? And anything you'd love to get across? Like what's a burning thing that really inspires you every day?
Personally, it's a bit maybe not politically correct to say it, but the current humanitarian system is not working in its best. It's not optimal. And it's complicated. Why not? But it's about incentive mechanisms, and it's about big systems that used to work the same way for many years. And the positive side of all that is that it's changing. And it's changing thanks to really, really talented young people that are coming into the sector and changing the mindset, making things more collaborative, making things more data-driven, more human-centric, and really bringing meaning to all those buzzwords that people have been saying for a while, but now it's actually being starting to be implemented. So I really want to say to all the people that may be in the field of humanitarian or data or the nexus, this is a really exciting time to be in this sector because things are changing and things are moving. And Brent, I think the existence of this meetup is a signal for that also, and many other groups that are coming up now. So I really want to encourage everyone that's in this field to stay. And yeah, things are sometimes challenging, but it's so rewarding, and we are really in a transition point at the moment. And maybe Costanza can say a little bit, because she did a lot of her PhD on stuff that are not humanitarian, and now with raw census, she's really focusing on that. So maybe you can share a little bit, Costanza.
I totally agree with what you have said. And for me, so as I said before, for me it has been really super motivating. So I guess when you come also at the end of an academic journey, which is very long and very demanding, and sometimes you have the feeling also at least in I don't know if it is general, but at least for me it was like I had the feeling that what I was doing was very kind of like self-reinforcing. So you write papers, you go to conferences, and then you discuss your work with the other few people that work exactly in your niche. But sometimes you had the feeling that a bit that's it, right? And in this case, for me, it has been incredible to see the impact of the work that you can do and the impact that it can have on the lives of real people. I worked in industry quite a long time before, and there of course you also have an impact, but it is usually on a very different scale. It's much more indirect, and sometimes it's on very small things. But then when you really develop a system that is able to automatically process broken English that comes from interviews where people really say the reason why they cannot sleep at home during night, because they are menstruating, and they really express this struggle and the incredible trust that they give us by telling us this information and by allowing us to work on these data and to try to change things. I mean, for me, it is an incredible motivator in my everyday life. So and it is completely different, and it doesn't mean that it is by any means less challenging or less technically sound or less technically impactful. I am publishing on important journals as I was doing before, just that it's on slightly different date. But yeah, so the challenges are that you challenge kind of like with normal data or normal tasks are all there, and on top of that you get additional challenges on kind of like the quality of data and things like that. So yeah, so for me it has been incredible.
Hey, I see that we have a question. Anybody have a question they want to ask?
Yes, please. Super interesting. And I'm curious, maybe it's a little bit more technical, but just working with data myself, I find the pre-processing the most challenging of all, because writing some model and making it work is easier in a way. And I'm wondering if your approach is specific to each data set that you are meeting and seeing what are the issues there, or are you trying to deduct some standards that are applicable in any data that you're meeting? Because I find it sometimes difficult to decide, because it's very tempting when the data is there and you do have also your understanding of what is happening and how it was collected, what can be the meaning. Specifically with text is also a matter of, you know, how do you tokenize the data and all of these decisions. I mean, there are so many. So I would just love to hear your opinions of that.
Yeah, no, totally. That's a great question. And in our case, we, as Yao mentioned, we tend to try to work with local people for each different project. So we try to build a standard, so all the data come in the same format, so all interviews at the end have used the same data structure. But clearly, the people involved in the data collection are different, and also depending on the native language they were speaking and things like that, there might be differences. We tend to use the same model, and then we fine-tune the model differently depending on the project. Our idea, so for scaling in the future, for the moment, it is more on kind of like on an exploratory stage, but would be to try to see the amount of knowledge transfer you can do depending on how related the communities are. So our idea is that communities which lie geographically nearer tend to be more similar. So we would expect a model which is fine-tuned on a community in Uganda then to be nearer to be better to represent the needs of a community which is in Ethiopia than a model that has been fine-tuned on a Nepali data. But at the very end, what we would like to have is a model that is able to distill knowledge from different community and from all the data that we manage to gather, no matter how small it is, in an efficient way. So trying to basically take only the information which is semantics related, so from the user perceived values, and not be distracted by the specific domain knowledge that is in the data. But so we, with respect to pre-processing and tokenizations and things like that, the data, some depending on the project, might be very challenging because of typos and grammatical errors and things like that. Clearly, one option could have been to run a simple spell checker on all the data and try to remove all differences, and and then probably an out-of-the-box already pre-trained English model would be good. But at the end, we decided not to do that. I did a couple of trials, and I see that given also that people sometimes talk about very specific cultural practices, the model was just spell checking wasn't really working. So we are working with character-based models at the moment, so that in this sense we are able to deal a bit with typos and things like that. I hope it answers a bit, but clearly there would be so much more to talk about.
Thank you so much.
Mariana, I see that you have a question. And Mia, you had a question too.
Hello, yes, thank you very much for this call. It's amazing the work that Yao and you, Constance, are doing. I think it's amazing. And I wanted to ask you, what about translation? Because I guess that many communities don't have the same languages, and working with text. I'm from Colombia and I want to do a lot of work there, of course. But I've found that dictionaries are not in Spanish, or the best models are not for Spanish. So how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, shall I start? Maybe you can also say something after, or?
Yeah, I'll start and I'll complete.
Okay. So, yeah, no, thank you. This is a great question, and you have no idea how many hours we spent internally discussing about that. So I think I can try to distill it into a kind of like a short answer. But yeah, clearly translation is an issue. So usually most companies or clients we work with English. So yeah, because they might be kind of like international companies or NGOs, so that the working language is English. So at the end, what you need actually also to and we are kind of like an international company, so we do not necessarily speak the local language. So we decided from the very beginning on to rely on kind of like English translation of the original text. So the usual pipeline that we have is that we collect the data from local communities, and keep in mind that sometimes we are talking about very small communities, so even few hundreds of people that are very located in kind of like very remote areas, so they tend to not even speak a very standardized language. And in many cases, we also have the issue of multilinguality. So as you know, in many countries, like Uganda, where we were working, it's not really like you have a single language. So you go in the village, right, kind of like 1 kilometer apart, and they are speaking a totally different language. So it's very challenging. And for these reasons, what we tend to do is we hire native speaker, not only of the language, but of the specific language variety, and people that go there in a respectful way. So trying also to engage with the local community in a very kind of like the variety that they speak. Then the data is translated into English, again by people who are native speakers of the variety, and then the English data is annotated. And there we are also exploring variants where people that are annotating are also exposed to the native language that people spoke. And then we are training our deep learning model on the English translation. The reason why we are doing that also from the technology point of view is that, as you know, one of the big problems of NLP is that it is natural language processing, but many times language means English, because it is where almost all research has been done. This is when we acknowledge that this is a very big problem. And what we hope to be able to do in the future is to be able to have a multilingual model which is able to do the classification task directly on the local language, independently from, so without having to go through the translation step. But this is totally depending on data, and clearly we hope that we will be able to get to this step. But and this is actually, I think, one of the main reasons why it is very important also, given that we are a relatively small community of people working in AI and sustainable development and humanitarian actions, that we try to put together all the data that we have, and in order to kind of like have the possibility to train models, because you know how many parameters we have. It's impossible if we have only 900 interviews in a very rare Nepali dialect. It's impossible to do anything with that.
Really quickly, sorry, add on that. So some of the languages that we work in, specifically in East Africa, they sometimes don't even have a written form. because they are only verbal languages. So in that case, we really don't have any other choice. However, Mariana, because you asked about Colombia, and I think Spanish is a language that makes much sense to develop its own model, and there's enough data in Spanish that can actually allow us to develop dedicated models. So I think that should be Spanish, and a few other languages are definitely on our radar for a specific model.
Neil, you had a question, sorry, or Mariana.
Just thank you. Great to know your point of view. Thank you.
Neil, did you have a question still?
Yes. Hey everyone, I'm new here. My name's Neil Davis. I wanted to ask a question related to pushing for that interdisciplinary mindset in the work we do. So I'm only about 2 years into my software engineering job, which has nothing to do with this space, but this and many other like of these quote unquote social impact spaces I'm very interested in. So how would you suggest make this more of an entrepreneurial mindset to push for more of like a role where you do work on this intersection of saying, hey, I want to learn this technology. How does it impact this space? How does it impact these people? And how can we really push it to be the best it can be for everyone?
Well, Neil, I think you joining this meetup is definitely a good step in the right direction. And the more meetups and the more communities we build around these topics, they will make more opportunities for people to really join the nexus between different disciplines and make really data for impact. So first of all, I really want to encourage you to continue your interest and research in that field, and you'll find a good place to put your talent to work. Yeah, Costanza, do you have anything to add? And maybe Brent, you can also add about that topic.
Yeah, it's funny. We just had a podcast interview with we did a co-interview with another podcaster, Humanitarian, and so we had an interview with Sarah Spencer and Lars Peter Nissen with ACAPS. But that was a central theme in their interview of just we need more people working together from different vantage points, and it's sort of at a field level as well. Patrick, I noticed you have your hand up. Do you have a question? And then Mia, let's close with you.
Hi, this is very interesting. Thank you. I have a question. I don't know if you already answered it. How are you storing the data, and in what format are you storing it?
Thank you. It's funny because I wrote that question down too. So I'm super interested in that as well.
So currently we stored all the data on our databases in a relatively easy format for us to use. But we are looking into building APIs and interfaces that will allow anyone to interact with the data, to contribute, to train new models. And if you have any specific recommendations to how we should go about doing that, I really, really would love to speak to you and learn more about it.
Okay, thanks. So are you saying you're storing in CSVs?
In JSON.
Oh, JSON. Okay, thanks.
Maybe it was more simple than what I thought.
And yeah, before we get to your question, any problems working with JSON, and how do you feel about that GeoJSON, as well, when you add in geographical information? Is JSON great for using, querying, and all that?
Costanza, that's for you, really.
Yeah. So probably, I don't know, for doing kind of queries and things like that, I mainly use the data for training the models, and JSON for me is better because it's better. So I write in Python, and I feel that reading and writing to JSON is easier and takes less space than working with CSV tables, but I think it really depends on what you need to do. So if what you want to do is kind of like to explore the data and to print out things and to query the data and things like that, and possibly there might be thousands of better options. But for me, for kind of like the modeling perspective, it is what I'm using what we are using at the moment. Yeah.
Cool. Mia, how are you doing? And do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say hi. This was super interesting, and I love everything everyone said. I just wanted to, just make a comment of what's been intriguing to someone like a linguist, and the linguist in me found it interesting, like defining things as literate versus illiterate. So I kind of, wanted to just say, coming back from Australia and interviewing Aboriginal elders, our assumptions of what, knowledge is interesting. And I wonder how that translates to what you're doing. Is it literary? Does it have to be literary, or can we, look at language and unpack it differently? And I remember an interview, I was helping out with the Toronto Big Data conference late last year, and they were doing a great job in Canada in capturing a lot of languages that were starting to become extinct, where there might just be one person in a tribe that has that's keeping that alive. And I thought maybe there's a way to sort of learn about language in a broader sense. So I kind of squirmed at the idea of literate versus illiterate, because there's so much knowledge that doesn't necessarily come from words and writing. It could come from other things. So I was wondering how you might approach that aspect. And then I love the value, that I'd love more definition around that. And then the sentiment analysis was just music to my ears. I'm like pragmatics versus semantics. That those two fields are super intriguing. And so much to unpack. Congratulations! I love that you're at Cambridge as well. That how are things at Cambridge these days? How are you managing during COVID? What's going on? You guys are gorgeous. Lovely to meet you.
Oh, thank you. So this part about literacy, for me, it has been really a total discovery. And I have to say that there has been almost no work on these in NLP. So the only works that I found in NLP working with illiterate, so not really literate people, but not written or nothing that you could read or write, were people with disabilities in the developed world. And there has been but very little work, really, I would say. So this is most definitely an area where there is a lot of work to be done, and this is also very exciting, clearly. And with respect to endangered languages, this is a very, very active research direction in NLP. So where they basically try to work with low resource languages. We don't call them kind of like extinct or endangered. We call them low or extremely low resource languages. And this is most definitely, I think, the direction that us as rural census are going to take in the future. So trying to basically really being able to leverage even extremely scarce quantity of data in order to be able to train our models. And I know that this is definitely super exciting, and very cool that you were in Australia. And I'm sure it was very exciting. But so with respect to what you said about kind of like changing your views and being exposed to something completely different, I think there is a citation that Steffi Hiema always talk about, which I found amazing, which was about which is about toilets. So it is a widow talking about toilets, and then clearly, for me at least, every time I think about toilets, it's about preservation of health. So being able to have a clean a clean toilet. And but when they talk about it, they say some things which are completely different. So where, for example, this widow was saying, if I have a flush toilet in my house, I can be a king of all kings. And then she says, recently I was almost raped when I escorted my son to the latrine. And this is super interesting, because what she's basically saying is that a toilet is important for her for a reputation. So she wants to be seen in the village as someone people have to own respect and security. So because it's unsafe for her to go outside of the house. And these for us, or for me at least, was something incredible when I saw it, because it really means that we might be missing something if we just assume that what is important for us is exactly the same that is important for people who live in a completely different context.
Yeah,
and this is something that you can only know if you really talk to the people, I guess. For you, probably it might have been similar, right? So when you were talking there.
Oh, absolutely, total revelation of no, it's absolutely true what you're saying. Yeah. So Brent, what did you want to do? Like I kind of jumped in, but I'm gonna shut up now. Lovely to meet you.
No, I'm really happy that all of you got to meet Mia, and she'll be interviewing you, and we're super excited about, again, the interview, and I'm so glad that we had a chance to just talk more and get to know each other and kind of expand the dialogue and let members ask some questions. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be hearing from you very soon. And do you have any anything you'd like to say before we close?
No, thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure. It was really fun to talk about these things, and looking forward to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.